to Voices from the HoZ. Today we are delighted to have with us Jo Hickey-Hall. Jo is a folklorist, researcher and social historian with a long-held interest in relationships between the supernatural experience, local landscape and oral tradition. Jo was born in Jersey. As somebody who lived in Guernsey, it wasn't that far away from me, but that's quite interesting. And I know Jersey because it is an island scattered with a network of ancient dolmens and rich folklore. Partly due to her Irish heritage, something else I share, and the wonderful folk tales of her father, she's particularly inspired by the survival of oral law in rural communities. In 2015, she gained a master's degree in history from the University of Bristol, researching the portrayal of the SHEE in medieval Irish literature, supervised by Professor Ronald Hutton, an absolutely amazing person, I have to say. As a social researcher, Jo is interested in the taboo of sharing of fairy sightings. Her Facebook group, Modern Fairy Sightings, now has over 4,000 members. During the lockdown, she created and presented the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast. This has an aim to provide an opportunity to simply listen to ordinary people sharing their own accounts of extraordinary yet mundane encounters with beings they describe as fairies. So, hello, Jo.
Hello, thank you very much for your introduction. That was very thorough.
Is that okay? Right.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good. I think you know so much about this. When I was thinking about what to ask you, it's just trying to find the entry point so it'll allow you to say the things you want to say. And maybe, just maybe, if we get to the point where we both realize there may be some other things to do with this, what I'm going to do is invite you back to do another podcast. And that
Of
would be
course.
truly amazing.
Yeah.
Also, the fact that I know that you're going to run a course for the HoZ,
Yes.
and we're slowly starting to advertise that now. So this is probably good timing to do the podcast at the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, looking forward to that. That's the 5th and 6th of July.
Yes, at Unston, spooky house that it is, right? There's lots of good vibes and very odd happenings there. So I'm
Oh,
really looking forward to being there again. But let me dive into the encounters of the fairy world. And I suppose my first question to you is, how did you begin your interest in all of this?
mm. So I guess if you take it way back, and it also depends what you mean by all of this, because if you're gesturing to fairies or you're gesturing to other worlds, there's kind of
Uh,
two entry points.
well, fairies, to
Fairies, yeah.
keep the podcast contained.
Yeah. So fairies wise, the first I heard about fairies was not really the kind of, the fairy stories as such, although my parents did, they loved their nursery rhyme. My mum loved her nursery rhymes and would always sing nursery rhymes with me, and I've passed that on to my children too. But my dad was Irish, as you mentioned at the beginning. He's from Cork. He's no
Ah,
longer with us, sadly, died in 2014. We didn't expect him to go so soon.
right.
And he used to tell me stories at bedtime, and he was the best storyteller. He was
Hmm.
amazing. His stories were just real adventures, but he would always weave in aspects of his childhood. And when he was growing up in Cork, which was very rural, even though it was the city then on the edge of the city, um, this was the 1930s, the mid
Wow.
1930s when
Yeah,
he was born.
I imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. And he used to tell me about the way, they would play out in the lanes with hoop and stick. They didn't really have much. He was one of nine anyway. And so they all would be playing outside. And so he would tell me about these specific stories I remember relating to fairies were where the children might be off playing, and part of the story is that you're imagining you're one of those children, and it gets to a certain time of the day, and you've played out and you're not entirely sure exactly where you are at this point, and you've seemed to have lost your siblings or your friends, whoever you were playing with, and you find yourself alone, and it's getting to dusk, and you happen upon a fairy fort, and in the back of your mind, you've got the warning
Mm.
voices ringing in your ear, beware, beware the fairies, and but nevertheless, you feel compelled to enter this magical space, and you might find a patch of grass that looks greener than the rest, a circle of grass that looks greener than the rest of the grass there, and you sit down, and at some point you start to feel yourself spinning, and you go off into another world. And so he would tell me these stories, and I mean, I must have even fallen asleep listening to these. But in the stories, you'd kind of go away to another world, and then you would come back, and you would wake up in the, on that same patch of grass, and you would think, oh, I must have dreamt it all in the story. And then at that point, you'd be able to find your way home. So there are loads of motifs there in those
Yeah,
stories.
I mean that's loaded, isn't it? There's so many things in my head right now again. When I speak to people on voices, it's generally very rich. Already you start to do that for me, and things that kind of come up for me are this idea about trance states. I mean, I did train as a clinical hypnotherapist at one point at Oxford, and as a glorious 3 years, it actually changed my way of communication with people, etc. And this idea of working with trance, I don't like the word hypnotism, it doesn't help anybody. But trance work does help because you are entering other states of being. And even though it may be part of you, there is really something interesting and not qualified properly that you may not be entering the internal self, you may be actually going somewhere else. And I know that those connections with things like psychosynthesis and all that wonderful stuff about the extended self and glorious things like this, where the word mind palace comes up, I suppose, and that's a modern term for it, really. But you construct constructs of meaning. And what was interesting, you said that you go to these places, and yet you wake up where you started. It's a bit like
Mm,
Dorothy, isn't it?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, it
and
is. Yeah,
Joseph Campbell's Journey of the Hero, and returning to almost where you left off, but not quite, because you've been tainted by these things. So
yeah, you bring something back with you that is a gift, and
yeah,
it's some kind of wisdom or not, gnosis.
yes, yes, I think so. And I think that it's quite accessible to all. If we two things happen, we may it may happen for us, unbeknown to us, and therefore it happens. Or it may be, dare I say, induced if we're sensitive enough for these things to happen too. But certainly there are these other worlds, and we don't have to look too far past quantum these days. That it's actually showing us there are other worlds, and it's absolutely normal
Yeah, it
to
is.
have these entities and essences, maybe, of something else. Anyway, I divulge, I go off, right? So carry on. Tell me more.
Well, I guess, I mean, with those stories, for me, I thought they were wonderful, but I didn't realize how rare that was to have a parent that would, you know, explore, encourage you to explore these other realms, I guess, and open your mind. And I know that Dad had had his own experiences, kind of out of body experiences. I didn't find out that later until I was an adult, but he had had some really strong spiritual experiences. So, and I think when my brother and sister were little, they don't really remember him doing the same. But I think because I'm a lot younger than them, sort of my sister's 12 years older, my brother's 10 years older, then I have another brother that's 14 years older. So there was a big gap. And by the time I came along, and I think this happens because I've had two older ones and now I've got a much younger one as well, is that by the time the little ones come along, you realize kind of how precious it is, that early childhood, and how much you can, if you have the time by that point, which he did, to kind of lean into that and to enjoy, all the sharing what you may have learned in your life, because you realize again at that point when you're older how precious life is, and that the things that you might have been taught, or that you taught, or that he taught my elder brother and sister, you have a different sense of the world when you're older. So I definitely think that, we shared, first of all, my dad and I, we shared that propensity to,
Yeah.
tap into the other realms, always, because I was doing that from very young.
Mm.
Um, and as I grew older, I realized that I was very lucky to have had the family life that I did. And
Mm.
I was really, really lucky to have such a lovely childhood. So that's kind of my entrance into what fairies are. So it wasn't the sort of winged Tinkerbell types, although I had some beautiful fairy tale books and the nursery rhyme books, Hilda Boswell annual,
Right.
which was from about, it's like the 19, I think it's late 50s,
Mm.
and I absolutely love those illustrations.
Mm.
Very whimsical,
Mm.
um, and the kind of thing that you don't tend to see nowadays. So I did have that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think more the next stop for fairies was much later on, really. My mum did have a couple of Mary Cicely Barker's flower fairy books knocking about on the telephone table. So I used to like flicking through those, and I loved the rhymes that came with them, and I used to make up my own rhymes to go with them and do, colouring in and stuff. Um, but yeah, I guess the next stop for fairy will have been, well, I attended a lot of esoteric workshops when I was in my late teens, early 20s. And it was in one of those workshops where we'd been taught to see auras and use crystals and use Bach flower remedies and meditation and past life regression, all this kind of
Right.
stuff, that was, interesting in the mid to late 90s. Um, and in the break one day, the woman that was teaching it, she was called Kathy Shepherd, and she was kind of, I believe at the time, she was one of these women, one of a group of people, I think most of them are women, that were dotted around the world, and that had come up, through the sort of theosophical traditions, and were right at the helm of, the sort of green awakenings and the um, in the sort of 60s, and she was bringing that to the world, really. So she'd been kind of spreading the word for some time, and at this point she was, getting on, and she would come over to Jersey and teach us all of these marvelous skills and techniques and ideas. And just casually in the break one time, she said that she'd seen a fairy in the garden. I can't remember whether she was talking about the garden where we were or whether she was talking about her own garden because she lived in the UK. But I just kind of did a bit of a double take when she said that, and it was very casual, and I had a real strong reaction. I was thinking, oh, that's a bit ridiculous. What's she saying that for? Why would she say that? I couldn't get my head around the idea that she had seen fairies. I remember in my mind when she said that, I thought of the Mary Cicely Barker flower fairies dancing in a ring. That was my thought of what fairies are, And I thought, well, that's impossible. Can't be. Um, and that's kind of, it was interesting to look back on because we were seeing auras, we were working with all these different means of connecting in with other worlds, and yet when she
Mm.
talked about seeing something, that was just too far for me. And now I would say, well, that was my boggle threshold kicking in, which is, we through our lives, through our experiences, our beliefs of what we feel is possible, what our upbringing has been, and all of these things we've read and all of that. Um, we develop an idea about what is possible. And for me, at that moment, her sense of seeing fairies bounced off my boggle threshold. That was
Yeah.
beyond what I thought was possible.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, I know you were born in Jersey, and I spent about 2 years working in Guernsey. On occasion, I used to hop over in those scary flights between Guernsey and Jersey. It's terrifying small
Yeah.
planes. But I always felt, even with, I mean, something about the Channel Islands that is very magical anyway. And they have their own particular energies according to all the islands, etc. And Alderney and Jethu and Sark and things like this. But I was always transfixed being an inlander, right? I was brought in to do
Oh
the
yeah.
job, work for the Queen, and that kind of stuff. But I was mesmerized by almost the thickness of feelings when I was there on the island. There was a magical property to it, an unworldly, unreal feeling. Certainly, I mean, there is a dolmen in Guernsey, um, and its own fairy rings around that particular area. But it wasn't necessarily there that I picked it up. I picked it up almost like approaching the 17 different beaches on Guernsey, however small it was. But it was almost like crossing thresholds at that point, that liminal understanding of, hang on, something's not quite the same right now. And I've known a couple of people from Jersey, and they tell me similar ideas and stories of what it's like to live not quite in a place that's not quite real.
Yeah,
And
it does, yeah.
right, and it's just like, wow, and it's quite difficult to describe unless you've experienced it. Um, but certainly, like I said, it does induce you into experiences. It opens the gates, really, doesn't it? It lets you in. Um, maybe not. But
Well, I was just thinking that because I don't know if you can see behind me, I've got my backdrop.
yes, it's
Uh,
lovely.
this is Faldue, and it's on the east of the island,
Oh,
and it's one of my favorite places.
right.
But funny enough, when I first went here, I had my daughter.
Mhm.
Um, she's 27 now, so this was a long time ago. It was when she was in her pram,
Yeah.
and I went for a walk here, and I, it was a strange kind of ambivalent sort of feeling when I walked in, and I felt like I wasn't welcome,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
left, and
Yeah.
this, for me, this is kind of my second home now. This is where when I visit there now, it feels like coming home. And
Mm.
so, yeah, it's not always immediately open. It kind of, there's a sense it kind of like checks you out a bit. And I think that's what otherworld and otherworldly beings do sometimes, is that sometimes they kind of size you up a little bit. And it's not a judgment, it's more a kind of a meeting. And then, I don't know, something, when you feel that, you maybe you adjust, maybe it encourages you to adjust,
Mm.
and then perhaps if you have the chance to meet again, it might feel different, and so your relationship with the place could shift over time, I suppose. And but it is Jersey is it is an otherworldly place, and it's obviously very highly valued by the people that were building all of these incredible dolmens that are in such great shape as well, that that are all over Jersey. There's loads that you can visit, um, so well preserved and accessible. And to be able to just wander along and go and meditate in one of these places, you might be the only person there that afternoon. Certainly, a long time ago, it was like that. I guess as the interest grows,
Yeah.
there is more interest now in it, but still, you still can go to these places and be the only person there.
I mean, I was going to ask you about your experiences. It'd be lovely if you could share some experiences with us.
Yeah, sure. So, the kind of the big experience that I had, which kind of kick-started it was after I'd attended all these workshops, and it was some time later. It was maybe it was a good deal later in my life. This was I should mention in 2005 I had a very strong healing experience. I'd been working with healing for about 10 years at that point, but the experience I had was life changing, and after that my whole life changed. And so I kind of attribute what happened in 2007 when I had this fairy experience to what had happened in 2005. I definitely crossed a threshold at that point, and I've always said it kind of felt like someone switched the on switch, and
Right.
suddenly I experienced the world in a different way. So in 2006, I met my now husband, and in 2007, met him in the October in 2006, and then in the 2007, he was still coming to visit me in Jersey, and we were sort of going back and forth from London to Jersey to visit each other. And he'd come to visit me, and we'd arranged, to go and watch the sun go down, and we brought a picnic with us. And so we'd gone to this beautiful place, which will always remain unnamed, to protect it.
Yeah.
And it was, we was kind of sat there with our picnic, and at some point we were in an embrace, and I I was kind of looking the other way to him, and I came eye to eye. Well, I had the sense that someone was, when you have the sense that someone's looking at you.
Mm.
When I looked up, I saw this little green man that was about, you know, around the 3 foot tall, sort of 2.5, 3 foot tall
Mm.
size.
Mm.
And he was just looking right at me. And to me, it seemed like he was as surprised to see me as I was to see him. Um, the two main things I really noticed were his skin was just so wrinkled, like an ancient leathery skin, kind of darkish and leathery, just wrinkle upon wrinkle, not really any kind of, you know, clear skin, just completely wrinkled. But a nice face, an open face. He had round features, open face. Um, and he was just green. Like everything he was wearing was green. He emanated green. And I couldn't even, it's a weird thing because I couldn't even tell you if, I don't think his skin was green. To me, I always think of um, the tanned leather
Yeah.
color.
Yeah.
He was wearing some kind of hat, which I can never remember, but just he was all different shades of green, and he was emanating green.
Mm.
And he had lovely eyes, really open eyes, and he was looking into my eyes. My eyes were looking into his eyes were looking into my eyes. And we held each other's gaze for however long, a few seconds, however long that lasted. And at some point, I either looked away or I blinked or whatever happened in that moment, and he was gone.
Right.
And but when he was there, he was real. He was right there. It wasn't like a translucent sort of
Mm.
sense of somebody. It wasn't a kind of like a wispy sort of presence or anything. He was real. You could see him very clearly.
Mm.
And he was standing further up a kind of slope, and it was either before or in front of a fallen log. So I noticed that too. And the one thing that I was left with, the impression I was left with, was that he wanted me to see him.
Right.
It's a really strong impression. And now I feel, I wonder whether that was a kind of telepathic thing, or but that was the fear, the sense I had was he wanted me to see him. Um, yeah, I can't say, I don't know about whether that was telepathy or what it was, but that was the impression I walked away with. So I didn't say anything to my husband, my partner at the time, and we we were there. The sun had gone down. It got really dark. There's no street lamps or anything around there. So we went to walk back to the car, and as we did, and we got further up. To the left of us was long grass. Well, it was all long grass really, but to the left of us we started hearing footsteps that were following our footsteps, but there was nobody there. And so my husband got really spooked by that, because he does get quite spooked by things.
Mm.
And he started to pick up his pace. And then the footsteps started to pick up their pace, meeting our pace. And he started running. And
Yeah.
I'm kind of, behind. I'm kind of a bit running too, but laughing, because I knew I knew what was going on. Um, and so, yeah, he was a bit freaked out by that. And I didn't tell him at the time, but I did think about it a lot. And I did tell a friend, and she had said to me, because this is someone that I did Tai Chi with, we'd been in the kind of
Mm.
not so much esoteric, but sort of more sort of new age type healing circuit together, because yeah, anyway, we'd kind of known each other through various groups, and I thought, well, she'll know something about this. So I shared it with her, and it was quite a big thing to share it with her. And she said, "Oh, I think it's really lovely that you think you saw what you saw, but I'm sorry, I just can't get my head around it. I don't believe it." And she said, I'm sorry. And I was like, well, fine, because I had not believed this woman when she had said that she had seen fairies. To me, that was just ridiculous. So I knew how my friend felt. And I didn't take offense, because she's a dear, dear friend, and we love each other very much. And I know it wasn't that she didn't believe me; it was just that she just couldn't believe it was possible, and so she just assumed I was mistaken in some way. So I said, okay, that's fine. And I had started taking my daughter to horse riding up in another, it's also the east of the island. And he was just next to where she went horse riding, there was an antique shop with a very wise man I knew. People said he was a witch. He had a real, yeah, he had a real presence to him. And I liked it. And some people might have been put off by the way he presented, because it was really raw. And anyway, we kind of like psyched each other out for a while. We sussed each other out, as I would go in and have a look around the antique shop, which was, oh my goodness, it was just like a treasure trove. There was every inch of that shop was filled with something absolutely fascinating, and I loved it so much. And I would pick things up, and he'd be kind of watching what I was picking up, and like, oh yeah, you've got an interest. So I'd ask him about certain things, if it were crystals, and so he knew I had an interest in certain things. Anyway, um, after a time, we sort of every week when I went, we chatted more and more, and in the end, I felt like he was someone that I could tell about this, and so I did, and he listened, and then he laughed, and he said, "Oh, you're not the only one." So now I knew that
Mm.
other people had experienced things in this place. I told him where it was. And some years later, when we moved to Bristol, which was 2014,
Yeah.
this friend that had said she couldn't get her head around me seeing a fairy called me, and she was really excited. And she said, "You're never going to believe this, but a friend of mine, she says that she saw something in that same place. And what she describes sounds really like what you saw." And so I met with this woman that had also seen something about 4 years ago now, when I went back to Jersey one time. And we went to that place. And what she then described to me what she'd seen, and it does sound like it's the same being,
Right.
which is very interesting, considering, one theory is that we are drawing from, maybe you could argue, oh well, you know, you had been exposed to Brian Froud drawings, and therefore, because that's the kind of character that this guy was. He really looked like one of those characters. I've never seen anyone that looked just like he did, but it was that vibe. And if that's the case, then I was drawing that, and it was something from within myself. However, if she's
Mm.
seeing the same thing as me, the same being, and he behaved in a very, she described his character in a very similar way, and she saw him literally within meters, just a few meters of where I saw him.
Mm.
So my feeling is that he was the genius loci,
Right.
of that place.
Right.
So it was a very interesting full circle with this friend that then she must have had a bit of a realization as well that these things are possible.
So,
And it was great for me
I,
to speak
I,
to somebody else.
right. Does make me think of only because it um, happened to me, but I think when you mentioned the fact that you were in these groups, healing groups. I mean, Tai Chi is a particular thing. I mean, I studied the martial arts for God, how long? For that many years. All right, from 12 years old to 40, a long time. And the thing I got the most out of it is that it's about gentleness more than anything else. And alongside this, I when I was in Guernsey again, that's where I studied Reiki, and almost everything opened up because of those points. I think those experiences that I kind of half mentioned to you about crossing thresholds and being much more sensitive than I was came through being partly investing in that time, going all the way up to Reiki Master or whatever they want to call it in the SHEE system. But it's about moving energy and appreciating my own and whatever. I wasn't having a particularly good time at the time, so that's interesting too. But I did feel that there was a connection between exposing your sensitive nature for what it could do and just being more aware and in tune with things that are not normally seen or heard. Or I love the idea of those footsteps. It's happened to me too, is where I pick up on people walking or horses' hooves and they're not there. And I kind of put it down to no, it isn't recall of things I've experienced. It's another experience, right? And I do like that idea of the spirit world being embodied in someone as a guardian of somewhere, or the formation of energy in something we may half recognize. And I do think there's a cutesy element of fairies and stuff like this, but it's a bit like angels to me. I don't think they're cute at all. I think they're absolutely terrifying. But I think that, you've got to kind of go with their energy, haven't we? And they'll find you. I think you're right. They kind of suss you out whether they're going to
Yeah.
be open to you. So I thought that was
Yeah.
remarkable. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
have you got any more?
Have I got any more?
I have another
Yeah.
one, and then I'm going to ask you a
Okay.
different question.
Okay. So yeah, there are two other ones that I think about. Because I've had quite a number of experiences, particularly in Jersey. I had a lot of experiences. One time, so to kind of leading on from that, really, the guy that I met in the antique shop, we began to work together. He was sort of doing my cards. He was a very good tarot reader,
Mm.
and we both felt, well, I said to him one time it'd be really cool to kind of start working and maybe build a group. So there was another guy who'd asked similar, and so the three of us started work together. And this was very kind of deep magic work. I didn't realize at the time, but he was massively into chaos magic.
Okay.
And I wasn't even
Okay.
sort of really well read in
Sure.
that area, but it was more experiential for me. So he introduced me to these ways of working. It was just so good. I absolutely loved it. And we would go out to, dolmens in the nighttime, or we'd go to forests, or we'd work on the beach. And so a bit further on down the line, there were about five or six of us that were working. Well, at one point, yeah, maybe six or seven of us working. We were a really strong group, really, really close, could trust each other. And when you get that, you can work deeply if you've got that going on. And so this one particular time, be really good for me to date it at some point because I never quite date it. But we were down one of the beaches we used to work in on, and we always used to bring a big bin of wood and build a fire. We have various implements, and we would do a ritual on the beach, just going into sort of dusk. And so we arrived there one night, and no, late afternoon, evening, yeah, early evening, and we started to arrange things on the beach, and it started to rain. So we headed over to the side of the beach and scrambled up on some rocks and stood underneath some overhanging trees. And it was dusk. We were chatting, waiting for the rain to stop. And I was stood chatting to actually the two people that I started the group with, which was my friend from the antique shop and another guy. And next minute, this it sounds absolutely mad, but the stick man came running down the beach from the top to the bottom because it was a sloping beach. It was a man that was made of branches, sticks, every part of him, his legs, his arms, his body. And the way that he was running down the beach, well, you can imagine if somebody doesn't have joints in their limbs. So his gait was really funny, but he was very swift. And he ran down the beach, and I saw it, and so did the two guys that I was chatting with. And we turned to each other and just incredulous, but laughing. Did you see that? We'd all seen it, and that was amazing. And I always wondered what was going on there. Was this a kind of ghost that looked like a tree? Was it some kind of tree spirit? What was this? Because it was so bizarre and so funny. And years later, then, when I started the podcast, and this was episode 4, Mysterious Illuminations, I was chatting with a guy who had been in touch, and he'd said that he had these experiences in his bedroom of lights. And so that's what I'd arranged to talk to him about. And so we were talking about that. And then he proceeded to tell me that not long after that, in a forest near his home, he'd gone up walking with a friend at dusk. And as it got darker, they'd noticed this light in further down in the forest. So they're at the top of the slope, and this forest kind of went down a hill. And at the bottom of the hill, they could see these lights, and they thought, "What is that? That must be kids." So they thought, "Oh, here we go. There's kids coming up the track with some torches or something. Oh, but it's weird, isn't it? Let's just stick around and see what it is." So the two of them sat there at the top, and they're watching these lights come closer and closer and closer. His friend starts to get really spooked then, and he says, "Oh, I don't like this. I'm off." Oh, that's right. And so the guy that was telling me about it said, "No, come on, come on. Look, we're both big, strong men. We're both big grown-ups. Just don't worry about it. We'll cope with whatever it is." So his friend stayed. And as this thing got closer and closer, it then moved out into an area that was, an opening in the woodland. And the moon, you could see that this was a being, and it was made of sticks. He was made of wood. And honestly, he's telling me the story, and I'm absolutely flabbergasted listening to this because I've never met anyone yet. I had spoken to one other guy before that who'd seen a man who turned into a tree trunk, and that was in Brazil. That episode's called Brazilian Ent, and that was one of the first interviews I did. But that was different in that experience. He, and again, it was a multiple witness sighting. He and a friend had been walking along the road, and they'd seen a man walking along the road that transformed into a tree trunk, a walking tree trunk, and then transformed back again. So that was different. This guy was telling me, describing the same kind of being that I'd seen, and I said to him, "How did it run?" And he said, "Oh, it ran really funny." And at that point I thought, "Oh my goodness, this is the same kind of type of being."
Yeah.
Now, I'd seen mine in Jersey and he'd seen his in the northeast of England. So we know that they're in Jersey and we know that they're in England, and that's all I know about it. I have spoken to people. Somebody else saw one in Hudson Bay,
Okay.
uh, and I've read about one in the fairy census too.
Right.
So these beings exist.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was incredible. So, it's interesting that all these three people that I spoke to, they were all multiple witness sightings. These are just, you're not seeing it by yourself, you're seeing it with other people. And it strikes me as, that's kind of a bit of a pattern there,
Mm.
that it would happen like that. But anyway, so that was another real wow moment for me. And the thing is, back then I felt like I didn't realize how rare it was. I just thought this was working with magic. This was working as a group. This is what happens when you start working with ritual. I had no idea how rare it was for us
Mm.
to be working like this and having these experiences.
Yeah. I mean, I do feel that certain parts of where we live resonate a little bit differently than other parts. I mean, I lived in Bath for a long time when I did my first fine art degree and whatever, and remember going to some quite distinctly wild parties in that area. It was wonderful below chalk horses and things like this, and I had some fantastic times. Not all naturally induced, but they were great. And I do remember some very odd occurrences around there, Bath and Bristol and places like this, around that area of that land. There is something very energetic and live about those places, much like Jersey, much like Guernsey, and much like these places where people get pulled towards, who've got a certain resonance, if you like, and say that. Um, I mean, even in the Northeast, there's some quite barren but very, I would call thick places where stuff happens too. So it's interesting in these areas where people are attracted to certain things or they get the calling to that, that these are places that occur. I mean, in my lifetime, I've seen quite some very odd things, etc. Um, I don't necessarily take it for granted, but I'm never surprised by it. It's like, oh, right, okay, fine. There you go. And there we go again. But it does seem to happen to people in these types of places which got that energy. Why do people build dolmens in these places? And there is a need to have that in terms of some veneration of something.
Mm.
So yeah, I think that's some remarkable stuff. Um, and I was going to ask you a question about other people's experiences, but you've actually answered my question about your similarities and other people's similarities. But you mentioned one guy who was an influence on you. Who else had a remarkable influence on you in pursuit of this work?
Um, Directly, I
Mm.
mean, I guess the three people would probably be my dad,
Yeah.
Fox, was this guy that I worked with, dear friend of mine, sadly passed away um, a good few years ago now, and Martin Rothman, who
Right.
was taught me body mirror system, and again, very very dear friend. And they were all like father figures to me. Well, dad obviously was my dad, but the other two were like father figures to me too. They were
Yeah.
all like my fathers,
Mm.
and very, very dear, and taught me a lot about the kind of limits of this material world and expanse of other worlds and other realms that are around us and that we are able to move into. And in terms of kind of academic influences or esoteric sort of influences or
Mm.
um, I think, well, definitely I'd say the work of sort of, I don't think he'd want to call himself an academic, but Patrick Harper,
Okay.
hugely, you know, um, I think also you've got the work of folklorists like
Yep.
Marjorie T. Johnson. Um, Simon Young edited Seeing Fairies, which is her collection of fairy experiences from the 1930s onwards,
Yeah.
mostly the 50s, but a lot settled around the 1930s too, and onwards right up to the late 80s, even early 90s, I think.
Mm.
And Simon Young himself, of course, because he then did the fairy census around the time that I was becoming, starting to research in this area, not for my own choice actually, but kind of led this way. Simon was kind of beginning the fairy census at the same time, so we crossed paths in the early days, and so obviously his work is a huge influence. Um, and people like Dermot McManus, I love his Middle Kingdom, and yeah, I guess there must be more that Evans Wentz, of course.
Yeah.
You know, there's there's a lot of work out there that I'm really, grateful for. But I think also just people, just ordinary people and their experiences, I know I'd had my own experiences, but it wasn't until I then spoke to other people and heard their experiences that you really get a sense of how widespread this is
Mm.
and how much meaning it holds for people, for
Yeah.
all of us.
I mean, I think we're touching on something about what matters to you.
Yeah, what matters to me is the meaning of it. It's like even just me sharing my experiences with you is a
Mm.
very precious thing to share, and and it must be treated with respect. And this is how I feel about the people that come and share their stories with me. It must be honored. You've got the person who is telling their story. You have got the being that they met
Mm.
and interacted with, communed with. You've got the landscape that it took place upon, if that is the case. And all of these things, they merit respect.
Right.
That story is kind of, it almost becomes like an entity in itself. And so it's precious who you share these things with. And so starting the project was important to me to create a space where people could share safely and not be fear of ridicule. And also just to get past the really tedious, oh, are they real? Are they not? Oh, are they real? It's like, look, we have seen, we've experienced, and you can carry on talking about whether they're real or not. We just want to talk about how it feels and what it meant to us. And
Mm.
we want to exchange with each other because it's really helpful to just be able to compare how it felt and feel a sense of community as well. Because when someone else has experienced something like this, it feels like you can just talk openly, you can relax about it, you can really explore together. And sometimes one person's story might still push your boggle threshold and you're thinking, oh, really? That's so different to mine. Or, you see the similarities and it's like, yeah, 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 I really feel what that's like. Or, but if something is really unusual, it kind of pushes you to think about what you feel is possible,
Mm.
or it might get you to think about an aspect of your experience in a different way. Because the more we talk about it, the more understanding we have, which is why, if these kinds of discussions are shut down, like they were through the idea of this being taboo or people being ridiculed,
Mm.
nobody gets to hear about it. Nobody gets to expand their sense of what this world that we live in now is about, and the limits of it. So over time, people have done a really good job, or power structures have done a really bloody good job of
Yeah.
shutting people up,
Yes.
right? And so now this is why it's important to talk about it.
Yeah. it's a counter to the fear around at the moment. I think it's a way of doing this. I mean, I did ask you about what mattered to you, but it feels like these are learning experiences, aren't they? This is about what that journey's brought us, and what we experience is how we're taught.
Yeah, we can, I mean, it can be a healing experience. It can be, terrifying too, but there's a quality in that too, and it's moving through these thresholds, a bit like what we were sort of discussing before we started this conversation about, these really difficulties and suffering that we experience, how we move through that, and the people that we are on the other side of that.
Yeah,
So, they're quite different, really. I suppose it opens you to the wonder. It shows you that, you know, that there is more out there that calls to you. And unlike many other of my guests, it really does call to you to live your life in a different way,
right.
or at least the invitation is there.
I mean, you do some marvelous podcasts, actually, Joe, which there is a link to those on the front page of this uh,
Okay.
podcast of ours today, and we just want to make sure it's there for you. And just to touch back a little bit on how we learn, but it's also transformative, isn't it? I mean, it does change us,
Absolutely.
and it's kind of incremental. But once you start listening to other people's experiences too, you start to see the formation of patterns of experiences, don't we? Um, and although that can be quite comforting, it's almost like it brings it to the surface so other people can recognize it too, or can talk about it where they couldn't talk about it. Giving voice to the unspeakable is one of my phrases, but I think this is what it does. Um, and although we find it hard to articulate because we are talking about things that are not so obvious, we do find a way of articulating these things, don't we, through all our senses. Um,
Yeah, we do. You know, there's a sense of what William James talks about, the vague.
Brilliant. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely that.
Yeah. And it really is like that. And it's not, it's not something you can put into words sometimes. And I must say as well that it's not always singing and dancing, a fairy appears. It's not always like that. It can be that you walk through a meadow and the way that the wind brushes against your cheek or, rushes through your hair, and you have a sense of maybe being stroked by nature in some way, or that you are walking through a forest and there's a particular tree that you feel, oh, this is absolutely beautiful, and it kind of calls to you in a way that you can't quite put into words. So there's all of this is this is what it's about, is the magic of our being within nature, and nature's being within us, and we've always been interlinked. We've just forgotten that.
Mm.
And so people at some point in their lives, I feel like everyone can relate to that in some way, even if it's thinking back to when they're a child.
And yeah, it just strikes me as something like Graham Hancock talks about. I mean, he's got these lovely programs out there at the moment, but we've got amnesia. We
Yeah,
know about this stuff really underneath. And what does it take us to open that up again so we can experience those things we've forgotten?
exactly. And just to see how much, even his work has tried to be
Yeah.
stemmed by those who would have a different narrative about it. But, this expansion is what we're moving into. And I think I've been saying this for a long time now, the tide is turning. And I think that those that maybe held the knowledge before,
Mm.
um, they're fighting a losing cause, because you cannot stop the tide.
No.
No matter how powerful people and systems think that they may hold and may be,
Mm.
you cannot stop the tide.
No.
And it's huge.
Yeah, absolutely that. And I think having these types of conversations, what's really important about them is, yes, we're having this conversation right now, but as soon as it's released on our podcasts, it's out there.
Yeah.
Right, you
Yeah.
can't stop it. It's out there, and on your podcast, it's out there, and Dara's podcast, it's out there, and things like this.
Mm.
And I think that almost creates the noise for change and
Yeah.
transitions and transformations and things like this. So what's next, Joe?
What's next? Well, oh my goodness. At the moment, I'm writing a book, and it's very hard to get a book finished with the things that all the plates I'm spinning at the moment because so I have the podcast, which I love, and my beautiful Patreon community, just such amazing people.
Right.
So we do a lot together too, and so that's keeps me very, very busy. And then I'm also training as a psychotherapist in core process.
Oh, yeah.
So that's with the Karuna Institute, and so it's kind of very sort of somatic way of working and leaning into other worlds. Absolutely love that too. I'm doing all the things that I love, but there's only one of me. So and I have a family, a young family, and some older children too. So it's tricky to
Cool.
get the writing done, but the writing is happening.
Yeah, writing a book, more podcasts, studying psychotherapy. I've done that as well. We've got too much in common, Joe, actually. It's very odd. Very odd for me. I'm getting a bit chills down my spine sometimes you say things like, hang on, wait,
Yeah,
that happened to me, that happened to me. Um,
we do get pushed, don't we? We do get pushed.
it's just in the way we're pushed to experience different things that amazes me always. I
Yeah.
think the last question I'd like to ask you, which is coming right out of the blue because I didn't prepare you for this, but if you thought of all the music you love, contemporary, non-contemporary, this, that, and the other, can you think of a track that kind of embodies some of this feeling? So we can put it on the end of your podcast so you can play out to it.
Oh, wow, that's such a lovely idea.
Mm.
Um, do you know, I thought of Kate Bush straight away. I know Kate
Eight.
Bush is
Right.
usually popular with people nowadays too. But there is a song on Ariel, and I'm trying to remember what the track's called.
Um, yeah, it takes time to drag somebody from the depths outwards, and certainly a piece of music, we really have to connect with it until we can say it. So that's perfectly valid.
I've I know I'm probably going to kick myself afterwards because there's probably lots of songs that I could choose here. Um, and I guess there's lots of songs for different occasions. But this one I love because I just love turning it right up, and it's just it's like losing yourself in the magic and rawness of nature. And Ariel, the album by Kate Bush, it's the last song on the second disc, it's called Ariel. And it's where the so there's throughout that second side, there's been this song of the Blackbird, which I adore. My dad used to adore that too. And the she starts to mimic the bird song, and it just kind of spills over into this mm, kind of losing oneself in the
Mm.
deep magic of the song and what it
Mm.
is to be. There's a kind of sense of madness about it, yeah, it kind of comes from really deep inside, and
Right.
there's a sense of the mystic and the witch,
Wow.
the oneness with nature, and
Wow.
the letting go and the becoming with, with the kind of darker aspect or the more hidden aspects of nature. There's something about that.
We got
Yeah,
there.
we got there. We got there.
I,
Again, it's the vague, isn't it? It's not the it's a feeling more than the words for me. It's a kind of it's what I feel when, and it's something very deep within me that you just really kind of let yourself go
yeah.
to a song like that. Yeah. Anyway, anything Kate Bush does is just incredible.
So we'll do that. Also, we'll put a link to that song on the front end so people can track that and find it. But it's been great to talk to you today. I feel there's another podcast going to come up anyway, and we'll talk about that probably when we see each other when we do.
Yes.
All right.
When
So
shall I just speak about that quickly? That in
you can. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
because what I've neglected to mention when I mentioned about writing the book later in the year,
Mhm.
there's actually two things happening. One is our marvelous weekend for House of Zephyr, and that is going to be 5th and 6th of July. And that's a residential. So we're going to be working together Saturday and Sunday in a great spot in Sheffield. And then the other thing that's happening is I am bringing Body Mirror System of Healing. This is the healing system that I use.
Wow.
That's something I also do during the week, is that I do healing appointments. So just 2 while I'm so busy. But I'm bringing that to Bristol, and it is the wife of Martin Brofman, Anique Brofman, who is going to be teaching that, and that's in Bristol on the 22nd and 23rd of November. So I'm really looking forward to that too. So yeah, I'm very excited for this year. There's going to be a lot going on, and I'm very much looking forward to meeting you and Lenny in person.
Oh, it'd be lovely. I can almost feel people writing it down in the diary now. So that'll
I
be,
hope so.
but we'll see you then and there. All right, Joe?
Yeah,
So, thanks a lot, and we'll touch base soon. All right.
great. So much. It's been lovely.
Thank you so much.